is it part of the law, is it part of the nature of law that it should be coherent?
But it should
Part of a
be.
legal system that it doesn't contain contradictory law? Part of
I
the nature of it or not?
No, I shouldn't think it's part of the nature of it. It doesn't contain contradictory norms. But it depends what your shouldn't means. I mean, because it's part of the nature.
I didn't say shouldn't.
No, you did the first time. So
Sorry, I mean,
but it
it's part of
doesn't.
the nature of the law that it does not contain.
No.
Why should that be part of the nature?
Certainly it couldn't be pervasively contradictory, but that's quite different from saying that there can't be contradictory norms.
Well, Kelsen spent 40 or more years of his 50 years of thinking that it was self-evident that a legal system doesn't contain contradictory norms. And so when you come across what you're obviously referring to, contradictory norms, you have to think of one or other of them or both as
well, there's a respect in which I agree with that. That is, it clearly can't be the case that each of two contradictory norms is simultaneously operative in the sense that each will be given effect. So in that respect, I'm fully in agreement with Kelsen. But the idea that there can't be two norms on the book, so to speak, that is, two norms that belong to a legal system as valid laws of the system that are contradictory. No, I don't accept that. It simply means that one of those laws will be inoperative in the same way that an anti-jaywalking mandate is that's never enforced and never complied with.
Well, Kelsen never said that you can't have two operative legal norms that contradict each other. He wasn't interested in what's operative. He was only interested in what's valid. So his proposition for the first 40 years was that you can't have two simultaneously valid legal norms. That's contrary to the nature of law. His proposition in the last 10 years was that it's part of the nature of the law that you can have contradictory norms. Now, I take Kelsen not just as some sort of punching bag, but as illustrating that how rash it is to say that there's a nature of law which is somehow just given.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that you're illustrating that. You might just be illustrating that Kelsen got the nature of law wrong for 40 years. And that's sort of oh, I think that's the more likely. He's quoted something that he had missed for a long time.
Oh, you think the second position is more likely to be true than the first?
Yes, yes. Well, I mean, he's right about a lot of other things from the beginning, but he's wrong about this.
So the right position is which?
The latter one. That is
the later
what
one.
he reached.
Yeah.
That you can have two valid contradictory norms.
Yes.
So I take that to be a story of theoretical progress.
Whereas almost all his successors, his followers fell away. But how can it be here that two norms directly contradict each other are both simultaneously valid in law?
Well, in the sense that each of them belongs to the system as a legal norm within the system. And as I say, it can't be that each of them is operative, that the two are operative.
Now let's get operative.
Okay.
But more interesting question is, are they both, I'm valid, you take me in what you just said, I'm sure, originate in some sort of valid way. But the other sense of valid that Kelsen was always interested in is, and ought to guide, legally ought to guide decisions.
Yes, I was just going to, the way I would prefer to put it is available, correctly available as a binding basis for an adjudicative or administrative decision. And obviously, it can't be the case that if we have two contradictory norms, they can be invoked simultaneously as binding basis for decisions.
Why not? Why not? I mean, if we want to confuse the populace in order to keep them down and paranoid fear of us, we might simultaneously say you must do this and you must not do this.
Well, a really quite terrible legal system.
Yeah, but I take that, I'm talking about something somewhat different. That is, that conflicting duties, I agree, can be simultaneously operative, not only valid. So if someone's going to be punished regardless of how he behaves, that's clearly, in most circumstances, an undesirable situation, but not an impossible situation. Whereas what I'm talking about would be a situation in which for example, someone would be required to do X and at liberty not to do X. And that couldn't be a situation in which the two norms are being invoked simultaneously in support of coherent decisions. So that's what I mean when I say, nonetheless, it is the case that for a decision one way or the other, if someone fails to do X, and we have to know, is the norm which prescribes that he's obligated to do X determinative here, or is it the norm which prescribes that he's at liberty not to do X? Each of those norms is available to be invoked in support of a decision on the matter. And so
Well,
that was
available is the let-out word, because are they both binding on the judge?
Well, so, I mean, here's one is subject to the rule, which is also a rule that the judge has to decide between them, and decide which one, for this purpose and from now on, represents the law. So that's a message just another let-out. And that strikes me as the law's let-out. That's the way the law does it. It's confronted with large-scale conflict, by which I mean a norm saying this is your duty, and a norm saying separately that it's not, or that you're permitted not to do it, to take a more likely scenario. And the judge confronts the two norms. He says, well, we've got a conflict and somebody's got to win the case. I rule that it shall be P. And from now on, if this judge has authority to change the law, which is really only for senior judges, but this judge makes it the case that whichever norm he was invoking was the norm. Well, sometimes judges can do subtler things. They can bring bits of the norms together to create exceptions that reflect the other norm and so on. But fundamentally, what we're doing is ruling that one of the norms wins and the other one loses.
What makes it the case that he's got, as you said, got to decide?
Well, most legal systems have legal rules requiring certain authorities to decide the questions that come before them. It's constitutional law in this country that regulates some tribunals in your jurisdiction to decide cases that are validly brought before them.
You think that's been made?
Yes, I'm sure it has. It's been made by those very courts.
It's certainly been affirmed.
And that's how they made it. That's usually how courts make law, by affirming it. Claiming as they go along that they just find it in our history.